This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
The biggest icon in podcasting.
Welcome in, everybody, to this week's edition of Doc and Jock. It's definitely going to be a good one. Strong opinions about the Lions, their young talent, the upcoming NFL draft, which will happen tonight. Make sure you take it all in. Understand that this draft is pivotal for the Detroit Lions. We're going to talk about all things regarding the draft, looking at Brad Holmes, looking at pick 6 and number 18 in the first round, how aggressive the Lions could be, all the news, rumors, what the Lions need to come away with in this draft. I'm excited because usually you realize that the draft is and has always been the Lions Super Bowl, but where this team is at, I'm excited to talk about it, but unfortunately we do have to talk about some bad news, and it's interesting, and it didn't really hit me this go-around that I was talking about, the podcast was talking about, we were writing about at All Lions, a lot of positive things. Usually, my little spidey sense will hit me and say, wait a minute, there's a lot of good things happening. Something bad is about to happen. This go-around with the talk about Brad Holmes, the potential of the Lions winning the NFC, getting a home playoff game, it was one positive thing after another. All the betting odds being in the Lions' favor, usually that would signal to me, something bad's about to happen. It didn't happen this go-around. And then, boom, Jameson Williams gets his ass suspended, a news dump Friday, and it was just like, man, my reaction was, are you serious? This is the news that had to drop? 6-game suspension for a young talent that the organization invested in, traded up for, and then you realize he spent the weekend in Vegas enjoying his life. I get it. That didn't bother me too much. But to look at it and to say, the Lions can never enjoy success. And I've tweeted that literally at Detroit Podcast about 36 times. Every time something is going well for the Lions, some shit like this has to go down. But I'm truly surprised that it involved a major rule violation. Maybe it could have been a ticket, some legal involvement, maybe an issue with a coach, maybe some more public tweets, maybe I thought would have happened with Jameson, but it's still early in your career. I'm shocked that after spending a year in the Lions program, that this happened to not only Jameson Williams, but to CJ Moore, Stanley Berryhill, and you recognize, man, are you serious right now? 4 Detroit Lions plus 4 staffers had an issue with gambling. That's just a major breakdown, and it's going to call into question a little bit about the Lions' evaluation process and how it impacts potentially the Lions taking Jalen Carter. What do you think about this whole mess, cuz? I know a guy like you it didn't sit well with.
No, man, I was pissed. I was so upset. I was like, are you serious right now? Like, are you for real? Honestly, this was the guy that was basically anointed by the organization, right? This is a guy that the organization went out, took a chance on, moved up in the draft to acquire. He was supposed to be that crowning jewel, that piece that helped set this offense apart from other offenses and really help take it to that next level. This is a guy who gets caught up by, let's just be honest, it's a very silly rule, right? It is silly, but here's the deal. A rule is a rule, and you must follow the rule, otherwise you end up in a situation like this. And obviously, he either A, wasn't paying attention, or B, just didn't care. It's one of those two options. There's no other way to put this. And what makes me so upset is this is just another thing. This is just something else you now have to add to the pile of, as I said on Twitter, of red flags. And I had a lot of people calling me out on, well, what are you talking about, these red flags? There's a lot of stuff that surrounds Jameson Williams this offseason that honestly just doesn't look really good. It's a lot of optics, and I get that it's just optics, but you start to add this stuff up, man, and it really becomes a little bit overwhelming. And I'm not sure if he's tracking in the direction of becoming a diva wide receiver, or if he thinks he basically has the world by the balls and rules don't apply to him. I'm not sure 100% what it is. But you are drafted to a team that it is all about culture and it is all about putting the work in. And to me, it really feels like this guy hasn't necessarily put the work in to be going out and making this much noise off the field. And when I talk about stuff like red flags and stuff off the field, it is liking social media posts where it's talking about bringing in a different quarterback. I don't know if you know this or not. You got a pretty good quarterback here, and you really haven't been on the field enough to really say too much about that quarterback that you have here. It's antics on the sideline when you don't feel you're getting the ball enough or you don't feel you're being looked at enough. Bro, you just got here. Like, you legit just got here. You were brought in last season. You missed damn near the majority of the season. You only played a couple of games. You just got here. Sit down. Sit down. Like, just sit down, calm down, all right? And then you see basically you have a guy who was a foundational piece of this team in Jeff Okudah, right? Whether you believed he was a foundational piece or not, he was. He was a guy who they planned around, they built around, and they hoped that he would work out the way that they want him. They weren't even looking to trade him if you listen to what Brad Holmes said. But they ended up getting an offer they couldn't refuse. I don't know what a fifth-round pick does for you, but it's an offer they couldn't refuse, so they moved on from him. That's fine. But his body isn't even cold, and you're out there opining for his number on Twitter. Again, just a bad look. On top of all of that, you knew you were getting suspended for over a month now, and you're going to go out and you're going to basically beg for a number from a dude whose body's not even cold yet? Again, man, just a really bad look. It's just a lot of things. And then you add into that him going to Las Vegas. That's fine. You want to go to Las Vegas? That's cool. Don't post that shit on social media. Don't post that stuff all over Twitter, Instagram, wherever. There's no need for that. Go enjoy yourself. Honestly, you haven't been around long enough for people to even know what you look like. So just go enjoy yourself and have a good time, but just kind of keep your nose clean. That's all you have to do. Instead, this guy goes out to Las Vegas, and again, it's all optics. It's a bad look. Shows immaturity. That's what a lot of this comes down to, is just immaturity and lack of awareness. You have Jameson Williams out there in Vegas at a fight, and again, what did he get suspended for? Gambling. What is Las Vegas? I don't know. The island of gambling. It's the palace of gambling. Like that is all Las Vegas is. It's what it's built on. That and whores. It's what it is. So to me, man, it's a lot of bad optics, but you start to add them all up together, and it starts to just make you scratch your head and say, was this guy really worth it? Right. Is this guy really worth it? When it's all said and done, do you realize we're going to get through 2 full seasons, and this guy won't even have played 1 full season? And yeah, over half of last season was due to injury. All right, and the Lions wanted to take it easy with him and kind of work him into the system very slowly. This guy had 2 catches for you last year. 2. He was involved in 2 offensive plays for you last year in I think it was like 5 games that he played. You now are suspended for 6 games to start this season. At what point do the wheels get turning? Do we get on the track, and do we start to go with you? Because it's been a lot of stalled out momentum. It's been a lot of herky jerky stuff going on here. And you were supposed to be a guy who was worked into the playbook and a guy who was supposed to be an integral piece to everything. Well, you can't be an integral piece when you're not getting on the field because you're spending so much time sitting on the sideline because you're either hurt or you're suspended. We talk about it all the time. The best availability is availability. And right now, Jameson Williams hasn't been very available for the Detroit Lions, a team that, again, traded up for him. And look, I'm going to make this argument a little bit later on. There was a guy in this same draft class that I think would have been a better fit and would have given you a lot more production. It might have been the Offensive Rookie of the Year. So I'm just going to tease that for you a little bit later on.
Listen, for me, cause real fast, we can't talk out of both sides of our mouth. What have we been clamoring for years? Some dogs maybe taking a risk. This is the one, okay? This is the guy that could be the troublemaker. But it's the way in which the behavior has manifested itself, not being available. I would have thought, okay, maybe if he talks a lot of smack, he's a diva, he calls out Jared Goff, he's a little bit moody, cantankerous, and just not easy to get along with. That's what we meant by dogs. Somebody that's just a little bit, super hungry and over-aggressive and immature. Blatantly violating an NFL rule that should be easy to follow after one of your a player from Alabama last year got suspended for a year. We didn't want an immature player. We didn't want somebody that when you give him $18 million is going to, go on social media and have no awareness of what's going on in Las Vegas. That's what we were talking about when we said dogs. So for me, I say, okay, if this is the one guy, better to be a diva receiver than maybe, a defensive lineman. This is the one dog that you can have that can have problems. Because remember, we're going to talk about the impact. The Lions, still went 8-2 with Jameson not being involved. So I don't think the impact is as strong, but it could impact the, draft, maybe having the Lions take a receiver a little bit earlier. But you still need, you can't count on a 33-year-old Marvin Jones to lead your team. So taking a wide receiver earlier might actually help the Lions. So for me, I'm upset. I'm disappointed in his decision-making. The immaturity is there. And I think what people don't understand is, in the NFL, the signs of a diva were kind of displayed by Jameson Williams, the way in which he acted at the draft with the weird poses he was making with the fans.
See, that was another thing, right?
That was weird.
I was just going to let that go. I was just going to overlook it.
That was weird. The way
you brought it up, so
that was noticeable.
Another thing you can add.
That was weird. It was just weird. It was either he was down or he was way, acting in a way that's just a little bit unusual. And then you combine it with all the other stuff. Other signs say, okay, this is kind of how wide receivers act. And now you're starting to realize this is a young 22-year-old that is not 100% with it in regards to how he needs to conduct himself. But for me, I think the impact is not going to be as great on this offense because potentially maybe they run the football a little bit more and they can make up for his production with the other receivers. I still think the offense is going to be okay, but maybe if you do have to draft a receiver a round earlier, that's not a bad thing because the earlier you take a talented skill position, the better the chance that Brad Holmes will find somebody, whether it be, a Cedric Tillman or somebody from Tennessee, the SEC, or somebody else, maybe a Jaden Reed if he's available in middle rounds. I still think there's opportunities to be able to target a receiver and help your team. So it's a bad look for Jameson, but you hope that this immaturity maybe will wake his ass up and make him more professional. And I said it on the All Lines podcast. I said, the reason why, and everyone, it's weird because the way people deflect and say, oh, it's no big deal. Let's look at other NFL rules. Guys, look, for an NFL team to get over the hump, especially the Lions, you need everything smooth and you need to go above and beyond what everybody else is doing. So when a guy like Jameson might be pulling in the opposite direction, that is just 5% energy not moving forward and not getting to the postseason, not winning. And anything at all that takes away from the Lions trying to get to where they need to go. The Lions are not the most talented team. They're a hardworking team. They're not just going to parade out there and out-talent you. They need everybody available. They need to outwork you. They've done it in a way where they don't have the most talented quarterback. They don't have the most talented wide receivers. They have the hardest working and the smartest and the team with the most intangibles. So what that means is everything's got to work right. When it all works right, now you have a chance to talk about success. But when you have a guy that's not pulling his weight and not available 6 games, you damn better be sure people are going to be upset. So we're not doing no deflection here. We understand that for the Lions to win, it's going to take Herculean efforts with 53 members of the roster and coaching staff handling their business. Any distraction, any cog that is out of place, we sense disaster. And why? Because that's what the Lions have always been. They've always been a disaster. And so that's why hopefully somebody talks to Jameson and recognizes that, hey, talk to him, get his ass on board so that hopefully, because you better be sure that this team doesn't start 2-4 or 1-5, because when he steps foot on that field, he's going to feel the wrath of a city that's going to pin the blame on the reason why success isn't happening on him. So that can't happen. But I'm curious, do you think I don't think it has to be like panicking, but do you think the Lions should target a receiver maybe in the second round, one of their 2 second-round picks dedicated to wide receiver? It's not a deep class. You don't get the sexiness. Everybody's pushing back on the receivers because the receiving class is terrible. Maybe you go a different way and you replace the production in the grind, maybe in the backfield.
Yeah, I think what this does is now when wide receiver wasn't really something that was even on the draft board or something that was necessarily thought about or was an option, all of a sudden it is now a need, right? It is a thing where you're like, well, we kind of got to fill some of that production somewhere. And look, this is kind of my thought. You talk about giving a wake-up call to Jameson Williams, right? This was a guy who, coming in, you were gifting him, 100 receptions a year? You're going to say, hey, you are going to be a part of this offense. Well, now you just shot yourself in the foot. You got to earn everything back. It's one of those things, right? Like when you were a kid and you broke your mom's trust, you had to earn all that trust back. And that means you had to go above and beyond. Well, at this point, you just broke everybody's trust. You got to go earn it. So I wouldn't be upset with this team if they went out, they signed a cheap veteran because there's still guys out there. If they went out in, I don't know, there's possible trade talks with Denver looking to move on from some of their wide receivers. You could always, if you do draft that running back like you're talking about, maybe you swap a DeAndre Swift for maybe a Cortland Sutton. Obviously, you're going to have to add a couple of things to kind of get that wheel greased, but there's possible a trading for a wide receiver. And with the draft, I think now it does adjust that draft strategy that Brad Holmes has going into this draft. I think, like I said before, where wide receiver wasn't something you were looking at or necessarily wasn't even something you were thinking about. If like one fell to you and you're like, this dude is a stud and he's going to end up taking over Marvin Jones by game 8. Like we need to grab this guy because now our wide receiving core is solidified for the next 4 years. And look, you're going to re-sign Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown is a guy who shows up, puts the work in, keeps his head on straight. He's a leader. He's a guy who does everything right. He checks all the boxes. He is the prototypical guy that you think about when you draft a dude, how you want him to mentally be dialed in. This is a guy who eats, breathes, sleeps Detroit Lions football. That's what you want. So Amon-Ra is going to get paid. So you're going to back the Brinks truck up for Amon-Ra. So he is your core that you are building your wide receiving core around. If there's a guy out there that they're like, look, we can pair him with Amon-Ra, and we know that for the next 4 years, these two dudes are going to tear it up no matter what Jameson gives us, we're going to be okay. I think now you have to consider that, whereas if you were kind of going back and forth, like, do we take a wide receiver? Do we take an offensive guard? Do we take a wide receiver? Do we maybe take a running back? Do we take a wide receiver? Any other position, I think at that point, it's just hands down go with the other position because wide receiver is okay. Like, we're okay with the wide receiving core. I think now it raises some question marks, and you got to absolutely look at it, and it becomes a thing. It's like I don't think he understands this, right? Like, his actions don't just impact him. It impacts the team. It impacts the offense. It impacts the front office and what the front office has to do to make this team not just the playoff contender, but a Super Bowl contender. And I think it's just, again, it's immaturity that you're seeing from a player. This is a guy who I just don't think necessarily gets it. And that's frustrating. And I think when you add this in to what they did in the offseason, right? When you look at how they addressed the wide receiving room, you got to understand the Detroit Lions knew this suspension was coming for well over a month. I believe there was a reason that Brad Holmes had his post draft or his pre-draft presser the day before this news came out. So he wouldn't have to answer any of those questions. He basically was like, hey guys, we're going to do this now because he knew when it was coming. He knew that the suspension was coming. Like, all the information's there. They knew, and yet all they did in free agency to address that position was bring in Marvin Jones. To me, that's a bit surprising. To me, it's a little bit frustrating. I'm shocked that they didn't do more to upgrade that room. Especially, like, I'm not sure how you feel, but like the DJ Shark deal that he ended up getting from Carolina was pennies compared to what he got when he was here. I'm not sure why he didn't necessarily get brought or why there wasn't a bigger play to bring him back, because when he was dialed in and when he was healthy, and again, there's the big win, that offense really, really got revved up. It was another layer that they had. So I'm shocked that Brad Holmes in the front office didn't do more to upgrade that wide receiving room. Did it surprise you at all, with knowing the fact that they knew for at least a month, if not more, that he was going to get suspended for gambling, that they didn't go out and try to do more?
Yeah, I realize that the Lions, when they look at what they're doing with the roster, they're looking for players with specific intangibles. So I see the situation in which maybe they were waiting for Marvin Jones to make his decision, and they had a plan in place to bring in a veteran, and they're limited by what they could do with the salary cap. So I don't think I'm disappointed in what they did in free agency. I think they like what they have with the veterans on the roster and what they could bring in the draft and with Marvin Jones. So I think that they realize they have the ability to make up the production, but it's just the development. You realize, man, 4 years comes quick, and you hope that we're all hoping that Jameson Williams picks up the pace and learns, but you do have to realize this is the NFL. If you don't pick up the pace, they could bring in somebody else just that quickly. Yeah,
and look, I think at this point, he's showing that he can't be trusted 100%. So I think if you're Brad Holmes, if you're in that front office, I think you now have to keep an eye on that, right? And I think us as Lions fans, I think speaking of trust, I think your trust should be a little bit shaken with what has happened here. I think this is a bit of a red flag as far as Brad Holmes goes, right? This was a guy that Brad Holmes was willing to basically move heaven and earth to go get. He traded up to go get him. And this is a guy who is now not necessarily paying dividends and has hurt your team. This is a guy in Jameson Williams who was factored into this offense, was supposed to be a large part of this offense. And again, you're not going to get him for a chunk of the season, this time by his own volition, by his own doing, by gambling. I think if you're Brad Holmes, we have this saying where it's like, in Brad we trust, right? Where you're giving him all the trust. And we've done a multitude of shows where we talk about whatever Brad Holmes' decision is, we're going to trust it. We're going to go with the process. We're going to go with what he's doing and what he's laying out. And what I'm saying to you is, you might want to dial that back a little bit. You might want to maybe pull back a little bit on some of that trust, because this instance right here with Jameson Williams is just kind of a small microcosm that I'm not sure Brad Holmes is as deserving as we all want him to be with all of that trust. And let me start here, okay? Because there's a couple of things that I kind of want to highlight with all of this. You look at Brad Holmes' drafts, right? You look at what he's done. So you go back to 2021, his first draft. Obviously, Penei Sewell. Nobody's going to knock that pick, right? Like that pick was staring at you right in front of the face. Dude's a Pro Bowl tackle. He's a stud, all right? I give you credit for making the pick, but again, something that you would have had to have been dumb to pass on. You now move into the second round of that draft. You have Levi Onwuzurike, who at this point is a bust. Aleem McNeil, who's a guy. Melon Fonwu, who is taken. He's depth, maybe? Like, I don't know. I think at this point, Melon Fonwu, it might be a guy who might end up getting cut or has the potential to be cut, unless he really ratchets it up and shows you something. We all give him credit for Amon-Ra St. Brown. That was a stud pick. Again, he's another Pro Bowl player that he selected. Barnes, look, I don't know where Barnes is going to fit. And Jefferson is just kind of a guy. So it really it's Sewell and it's Brown in his first draft class that you have. Everybody else is either a guy or they're just depth. There's nothing really there. There's no meat and potatoes. You go to last year's draft. Hutchinson's a dude. He looks like he's going to be the real deal, the legit guy. Trades up for Jameson Williams. I mean, at this point, he's basically touched the ball twice in 5 games. He's going to end up missing 6 games this upcoming season. He's a big incomplete. The big issue with that is how much he gave up to go get that guy. Pascal, I don't know. He's a guy. Kirby Joseph, he looks like he's a stud. Looks like he's a player. So you pair him with Hutchinson. All right, 2 solid picks in this draft. Mitchell, I don't know. Depth. Rodriguez, he looks like he's a guy who's going to give you some production. I don't think he'll ever be a Pro Bowl player, but I think he's going to be a guy who's going to be versatile and give you some production. Houston, I'm not sure what Houston's role is going to be. I think Houston in limited time gave you a lot of production. I don't know if he can give that to you as a starter. He might only be a third down rush end. And if that's what he is, that's fine. You grab this guy in the 6th round, that's pretty cool. You're going to get some production from there. So, and then you've got Corey Lucas, who, again, just depth. So what you see here is his first draft, he got you 2 guys. Now, yeah, both those guys ended up going to the Pro Bowl last year, so that's awesome. You look at his second draft, it's Hutchinson, it's Joseph, Rodriguez, and we'll give you a pass on Houston, even though we don't know what Houston's going to actually be. This guy has kind of hit on 6 guys out of 15. All right, you say you're a really good general manager if you can hit on at least 50%. So he's a little bit below 50%. So right there, little cause for pause, all right? But you look at specifically the Jameson Williams selection. You look at what they gave up to go get that guy, all right? So you end up trading with Minnesota. Minnesota, you end up giving, I believe it was a first and a second. I think there was also a third-round pick. With that second-round pick that Detroit ended up giving to Minnesota, Green Bay ends up trading up to go get a guy in Christian Watson. You mean to tell me that you couldn't get more production out of Christian Watson than you could get out of Jameson Williams, even in like a 5-game sample size? Christian Watson had one game where I think he had 5 touchdowns last year. You know, there was a point where Christian Watson was the hottest fantasy ad because all the dude was doing was scoring touchdowns every time he touched the ball. This is another guy. You wanted a speedster. This is a speedster. He's actually a little bit taller, 4 inches taller than Jameson Williams. This is a guy who can go out and give you just as much production, and he was healthy, if not more production, and doesn't seem to be a headache. So you look at what they did for specifically Jameson Williams, it looks bad all the way around right now. And it's all because of what J-Mo did. You end up trading up. You gave up a ton of draft capital to go get this guy. This guy sat on the sideline for the most of the year because he was injured. He then gets into the game, basically touches the ball twice, throws a little bit of a hissy fit on the sideline. Then you go into the offseason. Then he gets suspended. He's going to be suspended for 6 games. When you could have Christian Watson, who could have been there all last year, and you could be talking about this guy taking that next step forward in his career and being a part, being a dude with Amon-Ra St. Brown. You've got your number 1, you got your number 2 wide receiver, and you feel like that wide receiving core in that wide receiving room has really just taken care of itself. I feel like it was a total misplay going up and grabbing Jameson Williams last year, and I feel like it's just not going to pay off. And I think with Brad Holmes, in Holmes we trust, I think we need to dial it back a little bit. He's shown, if you go through his draft classes the last 2 years, yeah, it's been pretty good compared to what we've had. If you look at a grand scheme, he's hitting below 50%. All right? If you're a good general manager, you're going to hit 50% and above. He's below it right now. On top of that, you mortgaged a lot to go get a player who is burning you right now when you could have stayed and you could have picked up a dude with that second pick in the second round who would have given you more production and would have been better for your locker room. So I think there has to be some concern here with Brad Holmes, which leads us into the draft because, you know, Jalen Carter could be there. Are we trusting him to make the right choice by picking a guy like Jalen Carter? I don't know. So what I'm saying is you should maybe dial back some of that in Brad we trust. Does the pick and does anything that I just laid out, does it shake some of your trust in Brad Holmes?
No. Look, no general manager's perfect. I think that when you see the retooling of the team, you go from 3 wins to 9 wins, and now you see all the hype and potential. You're going to have mistakes. You got to take chances. Remember that in his talks with the media, he has said that, you know, he just couldn't put down the tape. Like, there's very few players, and you have to trust your plan. Sometimes it's not going to work in regards to how you evaluate talent or how you look at things. But he said when he was looking at Jameson Williams, he just kept dropping the remote, just couldn't stop taking his eyes off of Jameson Williams. And you realize that sometimes you can have all your ducks in a row, you can have your evaluations, but you're never going to know when you give somebody $17 million who maybe never had it. Psychologically, you can be these guys are coached up day in and day out on what to say and how to tell people, I love football, I'm going to be a good dude. But until you actually give somebody $17 million in cash and you're like, okay, what's going to happen? you can't blame the kid. I mean, it's 2023. There's a lot of pressures. It's hard. It's easy for us to say, hey, be professional, go out there. Dude, if you have to admit it. If I was 22 and I had $17 million, I might not have put a gold chain rope, but you might have saw a fur coat and maybe a couple ladies on each arm walk into a club. And I might have said something pretty stupid into the camera. But at the very least, you know that I would have had 5 touchdowns and I would have been like, I want $50 million. I would have been saying stupid shit, but it would have come across as, hey, he puts in the work, but this dude could play hard. But I do think that after this could make Jameson Williams a lot more mature, and I do think that Brad Holmes has a lot more hits than he does misses. So, yeah, we can always play the who the Lions could have gotten card, but at the same time, you realize, look, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Aiden Hutchinson, James Houston, 8 sacks. You realize, okay, they're building a core of players that fit their culture. And this is another year for us to decide and evaluate who they got. So I'm pretty happy with what I mean, because to be honest, we've seen Matt Millen, Bob Quinn. We've seen the team take tight ends at number 10. We've seen some real bad evaluations. I think Brad Holmes brings with him a track record that can be respected moving forward. But yeah, now I have to ask, does this preclude and basically erase Jalen Carter? If there's one thing I want, is the universe to make it somehow happen where Jalen Carter is sitting there at number 6. Because you know what storylines could emerge? Oh my God, Jameson Williams cost the Lions Jalen Carter. And then if Jalen Carter goes on to another team like the Eagles and dominates, and you have a situation where you take Devin Witherspoon and he's a cornerback that's struggling, oh my God, the debates that we could have. But I think the Lions are going to get off the hook here with the Seahawks doing the business for them. But I want to see what happens. Do the Lions add another potential malcontent, another risk to the team? That would show me balls. While it might stir the pot a little bit, if Jalen Carter's there and they take him, I would praise Brad Holmes and say, look, man, the guy's got balls. He looks at talent more than personality, which is what we've always wanted, at least what I've always wanted. And bottom line, if Jalen Carter takes the opportunity that he has and he squanders it, it's on him. I don't blame Brad Holmes for taking Jameson Williams. I blame Jameson Williams for being in this situation with a hungry fan base and you being on the precipice of being great and being okay with $17 million when you could have had 120.
I think with what has taken place, it does. If you're the general manager, you now have to look extra hard. Like, do we take a chance on this? I do think it does impact if they take Jalen Carter or not. I think it definitely does that. And look, I think for need and for the production that you could get from the player, I feel like Jalen Carter is the guy that would be the best fit for this team. I don't know if he's going to be there. I don't know if there's a chance that somebody better could be there. In a moment, we're going to talk about our best and worst picks. And look, I think Jalen Carter is a guy that obviously there's quite a bit of baggage. And a few weeks ago, we were saying you got to trust Brad Holmes. You got to say, look, if Brad Holmes is going to do his work, if he decides to go with him, we're going to trust it's the right decision. I don't think you can say that anymore. I think for me, if Jalen Carter's there now, for what this team's trying to build, I don't need another malcontent. I don't need to have one of these on each side. I definitely don't. Not when there's another guy who can give you better production out there, or there's a possibility that you could trade back and get somebody different or put yourself in a spot to grab somebody different. I was watching Good Morning Football, and they did this bit where they were talking about the Detroit Lions drafting at 6 and kind of what could happen. And to me, it really feels like the Detroit Lions could kind of turn everything on its head in the 6th position, right? Whether they end up trading back or they end up trading up. And we've talked about this quite a bit. There are going to be a couple of teams out there, depending on what happens with these quarterbacks. It sounds like CJ Stroud is falling. Like, it sounds like he is plummeting at this point. So if you're a team like Tennessee and you want to move up, if you're the Detroit Lions, you can basically move back 5 spots and you give them their quarterback that they need. You can acquire, you can flip-flop with them in the first round. You can grab a second-round pick, and then you can grab something a little bit later on or possibly a pick next year. Same thing with Houston. If Houston, who is at 12, happens to go with Will Anderson at 2, because by all accounts, he's the best player in this draft, you can then move back 6 spots, and then you could grab, somebody else who's right there, and you could acquire more draft capital. So I think the Detroit Lions are in a good spot. I think they really could flip the draft on its head. I think at this point, if Jalen Carter is there, you have to pass on him. I don't think you can bring him in just because you got too much stuff going on right now. Jameson Williams, again, his actions have a bit of a trickle-down effect. Not only does it affect what goes on in the offensive side of the locker room, and not only does it impact the wide receiving room specifically, it also impacts what they're going to do with the draft and how this could impact the defensive side of the ball. So, huge mistake from your wide receiver who you were looking at as being part of that crowning jewel to really help take you over the top. So, a big issue. But I think that does lead us into this part of our conversation. Who would be your best pick for the Detroit Lions at 6?
Man,
I think we're in the same spot if the guy falls there, but I don't know if the guy's going to fall there.
Right. I'm hoping it's Will Anderson. Maybe if the universe conspires for Will Anderson to be there, I mean, it would really have to have – you'd have to have a little bit of luck. You'd have to have a team trade up with Arizona, and you'd have to have a run of quarterbacks be – It would have to go perfect. It would have to be Bryce Young, Will Levis, maybe Anthony Richardson, C.J. Stroud in that order. Maybe –
And then you would need
Jalen Carter,
Seattle to take Jalen Carter,
and then that would be the case. That would be a perfect fit. But it never goes that way. I mean, do all 4 teams? I mean,
it's weird because right now it really feels like all the mock drafts that are coming out have Will Anderson falling a little bit. Like he doesn't ever get past 6, and he doesn't ever get past 7, but they have him falling out of the top 3.
Well, the reason is he played 4I at Alabama last year. His numbers went down compared to the year before, so they don't look as sexy as the others do, and that's why. And then here's the thing, and it's so crazy. That's why I love talking about the draft. Tyree Wilson is the sexy freak with the numbers, but Will Anderson has the productivity on tape. So either way, you're getting a good player. But I don't see it happening. I don't see a perfect scenario because I think a lot of the Will Levis hype was bullshit. C.J. Stroud might drop. You can't have perfect 4 quarterbacks right in a row. I do think potentially you get 3. I think that it could be for sure Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, and Anthony Richardson. But Will Levis and C.J. Stroud, I don't know. I just think that the Levis hype, he threw way too many picks, and he has a lot of holes in his game. Richardson's very raw. Could that happen? Could the Lions maybe even take a chance on a Stroud or a Richardson? I give that maybe 10%, but I wouldn't be shocked if they did it. So in my mind, I think the perfect fit is Will Anderson for the Lions. It would just shore up a lot of issues in that defensive line, and it would be I think he'd be a great fit. It'd be perfect. But I think it's just going to end up being either Tyree Wilson or Devin Witherspoon. I don't see 2 other players. I mean, I would be like, if you want to ask me, okay, what do they do? I think it's cornerback Devin Witherspoon. What would I do? I'm taking the home run, man, and I'm going Bijan Robinson. I think he solves your problems. I think you say to yourself, you know what?
At 6?
At 6, because there's no way. I don't think he gets past the Eagles at 10, who need a running back. I know historically they don't typically do it, but I don't think he's there at 18. So you would have to either move up and be aggressive to get him, or you say just take him. I mean, don't fall into this trap of positional value. Look at what he does, and look at why it's not as horrible as it may seem. Dude can catch passes. He could catch those 20 balls that Jameson Williams could have had. And now you have a potential to move on from Swift, get another draft pick. Now you have a home run threat of B.J. Robinson and David Montgomery. I think that puts you in an advantageous position to really make Jared Goff the quarterback that he was with the Rams when he had Todd Gurley. So go ahead and do it. Take the home run swing and say, you know what? And here's my answer, okay? Because I know all the questions. I know what people say. I know what you guys are thinking before you think it. Oh, my God, the team has massive needs on defense. Okay, you can address that with the other 8 picks you have. But, guys, here's the standard answer that a guy with the master's degree is going to give you. What better way to improve your defense than to keep the offense on the field? I don't have to worry about the defense. I don't need to see any cornerbacks. I don't need to see any linemen. Keep Hutchinson's ass on the bench. 3-4 yards with Bijan, 3-4 yards with David, 3-4 yards with Amon-Ra, 3-4 yards with Khalif, 3-4 yards with Brock, and I have a 6-7 minute possession every time I got the ball. I make Jared Goff the ultimate dink and dunker. I have an offense that scores touchdowns 6 out of 10 drives, and I have an offense that each and every game, the time of possession is going to be 38-22. Argue me that. With that offensive line, if you want to go in a more strategic plan, you take a massive lineman and you take a running back and you have impact. And now I've improved the defense to a point where I don't have to, I have them fresh. I don't have to worry about them. We can get into shootouts and be more comfortable. You don't have to risk another cornerback being a bust. You can take one later on, whether it be Joey Porter or somebody else. So guys, when you make arguments like that, just watch Bijan Robinson. He does things on tape that are special. Just go watch the games, and you'll see a guy that's fast, powerful, that looks like a gamer, that with this offensive line, with this offensive coordinator, if it's me, if I'm the general manager, I'm handing in the card with Bijan Robinson, and I'm setting records offensively, and I'm keeping the football, and I've just improved my defense by keeping them off the field. I'm not scared of doing it. And if he's a bust, then I just draft another running back in the next year's draft. But I think it has so many positives, and I just think that the fan base would get over it faster, because I'm just sensing from all the mock drafts that have Devin Witherspoon, the fans are not liking it. They're not happy with it because they're just spoiled, and they just believe that Jeff Okudah spoiled their opinion of defensive backs, and to some degree they're right. I think the Devin Witherspoon pick is smart. He is physical. He is a little bit of a player that you could fit into this defense, but why does a player have to be so physical? Because his speed is not exactly where you'd want it to be. But there's no perfect player. I'm okay with Bijan. I would love it if they drafted Bijan number 6. That would indicate balls to me.
There was a stat that I don't remember where I seen it, but basically quarterback or running backs that were drafted in the first round basically produced 4.26 yards per carry. All the other running backs that were drafted produced 4.2 yards. You're willing to spend a first round draft pick on 0.06 yards per carry. That's what the equivalency would be. I'm not willing to do that. At 6, for me, the best player in the best pick would be Will Anderson. You end up pairing Will Anderson with Aiden Hutchinson. I think it's great. Current mock drafts have him falling a little bit, have him taking a little bit of a tumble, and he might be there for you. I don't think it's going to happen. If it does, I'm going to be excited. I think it'll be fantastic. If it's not Will Anderson, then it's Tyree Wilson for me. And look, if Tyree Wilson's not there, I'm looking to trade back as much as possible, trying to acquire extra draft picks. And then I can look at drafting that cornerback because that is the next position group that has a ton of value this high up in the draft. But for me, it is Will Anderson, then it is Tyree Wilson. Worst pick for me at 6 would be a quarterback. And specifically, it would be Anthony Richardson. Throughout this entire process, I have not been impressed with Anthony Richardson. There has not been a lot that has sold me on him. When we first started talking about this, and you brought him up numerous times, I looked at some film, and I was like, eh. And I did a little bit more digging, looked at some of his stats, and I was like, eh. At this moment in time, I still feel very on Anthony Richardson. For me, the worst pick at 6 would be a quarterback, and it would be specifically Anthony Richardson. Again, with the 6th pick, you're looking for somebody to jump in right now and produce for you, give you some production, and Richardson would have to sit at least a year, at least. There's a lot of development that has to take place with him before I feel he's ready to get up to speed. Who would be your worst pick at 6?
Worst pick, I think, would be probably Christian Gonzalez. I think there's risks there. I know he's got talent, but I just think that would be an overplay. I think that there would be a lot more question marks regarding what he can bring to the table. I do think that Devin Witherspoon has the chance with this group of players to have success, arguably the best defensive back in the draft. Maybe the riskiest pick is a quarterback like Anthony Richardson if they take a chance on Will Levis, but I would understand it because you have Ben Johnson, and a year with Ben Johnson working with Jared Goff, it should give a quarterback a nice boost to start his career. But I just think cornerback is risky. There's no sure thing. So that position in and of itself is tough. I think the position that would piss off the fans the most would be Peter Skoronski or a lineman, somebody that is a future pick that is not an impact pick. I think would upset people. Listen, for me, I think that I'm on the boat. I wrote it. I'm letting Brad Holmes cook. I believe in anything. I believe that if they've done the evaluation and their meetings and the combination, it's not just Brad Holmes' pick. Dan Campbell has to sign off on it. The position coach and the coordinator have to sign off on it. And if Aaron Glenn or Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell combined with Brad Holmes are okay with the pick, I feel like it's going to be okay at number 6 and at number 18. Whatever they do, I think hopefully there's an opportunity to trade down to get more picks next year. Maybe you can go down to 10 if the Eagles make a call. Maybe you can add picks in this year's draft or package, if you really love somebody, why wait? Package number 18 and a pick next year, move up to number 3 and take Will Anderson. If you see it's if it's going to be Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, or Bryce Young and Will Levis, and you know that the Cardinals are willing to play that game and take Will Anderson, maybe you make that call. So make sure you stay with Detroit Sports Podcast at Detroit Podcast. All the news is going to be wild this year in the draft. I don't see Brad Holmes sitting on his ass, that's for sure. There's going to be some kind of movement, whether it be day 1, day 2, or day 3. He likes to make trades, and he likes to pick up the phone and call some of these general managers. What's the scariest position for you, or the player that has you a little bit nervous?
Another player that would have me a little bit nervous. I don't like cornerback this early. I don't like cornerback at 6. So really any of the cornerbacks at 6 make me a little bit concerned. But really and truly, when you break it down, it probably goes like this. It goes quarterback, and then it goes cornerback, and then offensive line. I think those would be the 3 position groups that I'm not a huge fan of at 6. Now, at 18, I think you're opened up for quite a bit. I think they can do quite a bit with that 18th pick. Look, you know how you're talking about taking Bijan Robinson at 6. I would consider him at 18. I do think he's a dynamic player, and that is why I would consider him at 18. But really and truly, if things were to play out in a perfect world for me, it would be Will Anderson, and then you could either take your cornerback at 18, or you could take a guy like Kalijah Cansey at 18, and now you've just doubled down on that defensive line, and you just strengthened your front 7 so much more. And that would be the direction I would love for them to go. Really double down, strengthen that defensive line. And look, I would even I would even double up on defensive tackle later on in the draft, because I feel like there's some really good defensive tackles that you can get a little bit later as well. Really bolstering and really trying to win in the trenches is kind of the mindset I have with this team. What would you do at 18? Who would be your best player for them to take at 18? Again, world's kind of your oyster here. You're going Bijan number 6. What are you doing with that 18th pick? Are you going defense, or are you staying offense? No, are you going to go offensive line?
Defensive line. I'm looking at Breeze, Miles Murphy, Lucas Van Ness, somebody to upgrade the defensive line a little bit, fill it out. That's the position I'm looking at. Maybe if you're really enamored with Brian Branch or Joey Porter, you feel like that's the guy you have to have. But I'm going defense for sure then. If I go offense number 6, then I'm going defense at number 18. Maybe with the even position of moving back and getting a guy with more value, or staying in the first round but just moving back a couple spots if there's an opportunity to get a 3rd rounder or another pick there. So I'm looking at it and I say, well, Benito Jones is back, so maybe that makes it another player that they've brought back. So you never know if that's the position of need that they want to target early in the first round. But I'm not definitely. I don't want to see quarterback at number 18. I don't want to see Hendon Hooker. I don't want to see anything like that. I just go one. For me, ideal is one position, one pick at each spot, offense, defense in the first round. You either go running back or defensive line, or you go cornerback, and maybe if there is an offensive lineman that's sitting there that you just know will be a guard that can play for you for a long time, then you make it happen. So I think balance is key for me, and a little bit of risk. So a little bit of sexy and a little bit of filling in the needs. I'm not locked into anything like where it has to be best player available or filling in a target. Just one offense, one defense, and we got a good day one.
Yeah, I think for me, worst case scenario, similar to what you said, them taking a quarterback. And at this point, it looks like Hendon Hooker would be the guy who would be available at 18. And I just don't want to see that. It would be one of those things where I think at 18, you can really do a whole lot. You got a lot of decisions and a lot of choices that you can go with this. If they wanted to go offensive line, I'd be cool with that. If they wanted to double down on the defensive line, I'd be cool with that. You wanted to address your linebacker at this spot, I'm cool with that. Got safeties, you've got cornerbacks that should be available here. I'm okay with that. There's so much they could do. I'm even okay with wide receiver. I think I'm closer with wide receiver. I think I'm closer to being near that quarterback, near that Hendon Hooker mark at 18, where I'm like, yeah, I get it, but I don't necessarily love it. But I wouldn't be really upset with it. Similar to where you were at with 6, where you're kind of like, I'm going to trust Brad Holmes, right? At 18, it's not very often you get 2 picks in the first round. Lions have been fortunate enough to have this 2 years in a row here. I almost look at it like it's a freebie. Almost look at it's like, all right, cool. Where do you kind of want to splurge? I'm going to let Brad Holmes kind of take this lotto ticket, and I'm going to let him splurge on whatever he wants to splurge on. So if it's running back, I'll let you splurge on it. If it's wide receiver, I'll let you splurge on it. If it's offensive line, I'll let you splurge on it. If there's another part of the defense you want to target here, if it's cornerback or safety or linebacker, or you want to double down on the defensive line, I'm cool with that too. Really and truly at 18, I don't necessarily think there's too much that could go wrong. And look, we say that now, they'll find some way to do something wrong. It's what happens. What do the Detroit Lions have to come away with in this draft for you? What do they have to? What does their haul kind of have to include? What's like the one position they must address?
Well, they have to address a couple positions, but the one is cornerback, where it looks like it's going to be early because they don't have many beyond 2023. The other position is the interior of the offensive line. You only have one guard and one cornerback signed beyond 2023. So those are positions of need. Those are important. But for me, here's the toughest one, the one that you wrestle with the most is, do they even need to draft a quarterback if you have an offer and maybe you tighten the screws on Teddy Bridgewater and you say, look, sign this contract? The quarterbacks, it does feel like you're settling. Here's the problem. Every one of them has great strengths, but clear weaknesses. Jake Haener is super smart, can run your offense, but he's undersized. Clayton Tune, does he have enough pro experience in regards to the offense that he ran? You realize, okay, Stetson Bennett, can he stay away from all the Detroit pubs when he gets to town? You realize all the quarterbacks are like a bunch of B to B plus quarterbacks. Maybe that's good enough, but I don't see a franchise guy where I'm like, I have to have it. So it'd be nice if they pick one, okay, then I know what they're looking for. Maybe it's the Dorian Thompson, but many people say his skill set is not good enough. It's just way too raw. So for me, it just has to be the cornerback spot, building depth there, and the interior of the offensive line, getting a guard. I think cornerback is more important because I think that you can draft in coming years and to fill the area of need in free agency if you need it. Jonah Jackson's decent. Maybe you get one extra year out of Graham Glasgow, but you're going to get a guard, no doubt about it. It's just where.
Yeah, I think for me, the Detroit Lions have to come away with another linebacker, and you have to upgrade that defensive line. I know you said cornerback, and look, I agree with you. Cornerback is a position that's lacking, but you've seen what they were able to do in free agency this year. They have the ability to go out and to find guys and add guys and grab guys and put them in and get them to play in their system. So cornerback, I'm not necessarily worried about. I am worried about how you strengthen that defensive line because I feel like that defensive line just got ran all over last year. I am concerned with linebacker. Look, I like Malcolm Rodriguez. I think Rodrigo's great. All right. Do I think he's a top-end talent? No. I just think he's a guy. I think he's probably better than just a guy, but I don't think he's a Pro Bowl player. I think what you could do is you could go add a guy, maybe like a Jack Campbell, Noah Sewell, if he's your cup of tea. There's Drew Sanders out of Arkansas. There's a couple of linebackers that should be available for you to add. That's going to help strengthen that front seven, and guys who are going to help just cause ruckus up front, make it really tough for teams to run on you and put pressure on quarterbacks. So for me, they have to address that linebacking core and really strengthen that front seven. That's it for me.
How you taking in the draft, cuz? How you taking in the draft?
I'll be watching it at home.
Yeah.
You know. Are you going down to you going down to Allen Park to watch it?
Yeah, it's gonna be wild. Second year going down there. It's tough, you know. Here's the thing. The full cycle, and to give you guys a preview of what you're going to see, is you're going to get the announcement of the story, the grades, the reaction, then the player talks, then Brad Holmes will talk at the end of the night. And we got to do that twice. And that's not even including if he does make a trade, you know? So it's tough. It's a grind, but, you know, we do it. You guys are loving it. You're loving the mock drafts. You're loving the podcast. It's beyond crazy. Like, it's, you know, and, you know, when you have controversy, that's always good too. So you go down there, you get the access, and it's part of the gig. You do it. It's fun. It's you know, you get to see kind of the excitement of somebody knowing that, you know, they're about to have their life changed. And then the Friday, they fly in from KC to Detroit. So then you get to meet them in person and start to develop, okay, hey, what's this guy about? What does he think about Detroit? And basically it's really the official start of the 2023 year, is filling out the draft and bringing as much information to the viewers as possible. Check out All Lions. We'll have a tracker. It's going to have needs, and SI does good work. They're going to hopefully potentially get us videos if they have reporters on site there in Kansas City. So SI is doing their part in the partnership with All Lions, and they do their best to bring us coverage. And thank you, Albert Breer, for that little rumor nugget of you know, indicating that the Lions were taking calls at number 18. That always helps. So the partnership is good, and the national site does their best that they can. So I'll be there grinding. The blessing is it's the end of the month, so, you know, I don't have to put out as many articles as I did last year because the readership is so strong and because Jameson Williams did it. But we'll do it just because you're competitive and you want to get as many page views as humanly possible. So it's fun, but it's a grind. But then after that, you know, that Monday, Tuesday can be a little bit more relaxed. And it's not, I mean, cuz, come on. I mean, literally, this hour just flew by, and I feel like we can go another 4 hours, you know, because it's football. It's something I love. It fulfills the competitive juices. Being a 5'4", 195-pound overweight writer, it just does the job. It goes by quick. Coffee, and you're talking football. So and literally, and everybody knows it. Just me walking in there, getting DSP's logo on television, getting the exposure that we got is just, you know, personally for me, regarding if anybody reads it or they don't, it's just like that little bit of knowledge, knowing that you guys made it so that a podcaster can come in and cover your team at the NFL level and do it at a reasonable level. It just is a personal satisfaction knowing that that if it was up to them, they wouldn't have me. And knowing that a podcaster is covering the NFL, it just means a lot. And any way possible to expose DSP to the masses, that's what I'm about. So I can't wait.
Yeah, it should be a good time. Before we get out of here, because I know we're kind of running up against it, what are some things that have kind of changed for you as we've kind of gone through this draft process? Like, one of the things for me, there's been a couple, but one of them for me is when we first started doing this, I was adamantly opposed to a running back in the first round. I'm now more open to it. You kind of got me on the Bijan train.
Because he's good. He's a good player.
I'm more open to running back in the first round. I don't necessarily like it. It's not my first choice, but I'm not going to crush that pick. Whereas in the past, that would have been something that I would have just been like, absolutely not, can't do. Something else that's kind of changed for me is I've wanted Jalen Carter with everything, right? Like, he's been the guy. He's been like the dude that I feel like could help transform this defense. As this process has kind of unfolded and as things have kind of taken place outside of the draft spectrum, the draft sphere, you bring in Jameson Williams. I've now kind of moved away from Jalen Carter. I've kind of pushed him to the side. So what is one thing that has kind of changed for you as we've kind of worked our way up to the draft?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it just has to do with the coverage, meaning that I wasn't a guy that watched a lot of film leading up to 2021, 2022. And I was like, man, who would spend their time from January to April just looking at all these players and doing all the draft stuff and stuff? I'm like, there's so much out there.
Me.
Yeah, exactly. So then I'm like, you know what? Let me just watch a little bit more film. Let me break it down. We have more access to look at it. And I said, I can understand why it can be fun, where you can kind of formulate your opinions and discuss fits and things like that. So I appreciate those that dedicate themselves to the 4-month grind. I didn't do it like hardcore, but I watched film of everybody that potentially will be added on day one, I've seen film on. Now, the rest of it, I'll trust the vast array of those that are far more knowledgeable than me on day 2 and day 3. But I have an awareness. I've read all the information on the various sites regarding these players. I just haven't watched film on everybody. The day 1, day 2, I have a lot of knowledge of some of these players, and it does help the coverage. But I do have more respect for those that cover it and watching film and fits and stuff like that. I'll say this, in regards to best player available or fits, I'm kind of liking Brad Holmes' strategy. Just find the player that you think will produce and fits and has the intangibles, has the wherewithal to fit your culture. So I don't care. Like, I think for me, what's changes, I don't care about, if they believe, and I'm talking about my heat level, if they believe Michael Mayer is the guy from Notre Dame that's going to take this offense, and they stand up there and they say, this player will make Jared Goff better and make us win and make us get to the postseason. This is the guy that will take us over the hump and get us playoff wins. This is the Gronk of our team. If they're willing to say that, I'm okay with different positions that are outside the box. I think for me, in talking to you about it, I think positional value means less and less when you watch film. Like, if the player's good and you see Bijan Robinson, there's no way you can sit there and watch highlights of Bijan Robinson and then look deeper and realize this guy has home run threat with an offensive line, with the wherewithal to be hungry and want to be great. This guy would fit the Lions. I don't care what position he's at. I don't care about positional value. As long as he's a good player, then get him anywhere. Get as many good players as possible. I think people guys, the best thing to say is, out of these 32 GMs, 28 of them are going to be fired in 4 years. So stop worrying about positional value. It doesn't work like that. It works like the best teams have the best players and the best personnel department. Don't worry about the position. Now, of course, do you want to make it a habit of drafting tight ends in the first round at number 6? No. But if you get Gronk at number 6, you don't want a guy with 12 touchdowns that makes it a nightmare for your opposing defenses to cover your offense? Come on now. So I think for me, positional value means less and less. I just want good football players to take the Lions over the hump to get them to the postseason.
I get you, man. And I think that's something else that I've kind of adjusted to a little bit. It's no longer about, I guess, position of need. It is about who is the most talented guy that you can get.
Yes.
Who's going to come in and make the biggest impact basically day one when they step on the turf, when they're 10 toes basically in the sand. Who's the guy who's going to help catapult my team to where it needs to be? It doesn't matter if we've got 7 wide receivers. If 5 of them are like straight up dogs, then let's go. You know what I'm saying? I'm taking that 8th wide receiver. It's just kind of what it is. So I think that's one of the other things that really have kind of adjusted and changed for me as we've made our way through this draft process.
Make sure you follow Adam on Twitter at AdamRSTROZ. Follow the network at Detroit Podcast. All great audio content. Make sure anywhere you listen to podcasts, just type in Detroit Sports Podcast. Just type in Detroit Sports Podcast, and our content will find you. Great stuff, cuz I love our draft previews. I love the excitement level. It's a new vibe with Brad Holmes. There's not as much distrust. Now, there's certain things that can happen. Hey, pay attention. Nothing is perfect. Brad Holmes is not going to hit on all 9 picks, but in the end, I do believe that if the Lions reach the level of success that we believe, 2021, 2022, 2023 will be 3 years that'll be heavily studied in the years of the Lions, where you could have potentially added 12 players that could be core of this team for the next decade. Think about that. So make sure you get excited, stay excited, listen to Detroit Sports Podcast, and follow All Lions for all your draft coverage. Make sure to check out Adam's Twitter page. It has a chance to be very electric should things not go the way in which he wants. Cuz I can't wait to break it all down and review what the hell the Lions did on the next episode of Doc and Jock.